Penguin Random House Audio presents Morbidly Curious. A scientist explains why we can't look away. This is the author, Coltan Scrivner. To those with dark minds but soft hearts. Prologue. In 2004, Saw brought the gore splatter subgenre of horror into the mainstream. Nearly 20 years, 8 films, and over $1 billion later, Saw has become one of the most popular horror franchises of all time. The films center around a serial killer vigilante named Jigsaw who kidnaps and tortures people, subjecting them to the physical or psychological torment he calls games in order to test their will to survive, and to pay for their ungratefulness in life. When Spiral, the 9th installment in the franchise, came out in 2021, it received a blistering review from the New York Post movie critic Johnny Oleksinski. Fans of Saw, Oleksinski wrote, are depraved lunatics who should not be allowed near animals or most other living things. He goes on in his review to say that these so-called movies are completely and utterly worthless and barely deserve to exist on the periphery of cinema. Ouch. I've never encountered a critique quite as vitriolic as this Spiral review. It wasn't just the film that got trashed in the review. The fans were dragged down with it. According to Oleksinski, enjoying the Saw films wasn't just a matter of taste or class. Instead, it was a matter of moral standing. Someone who enjoys the depiction of gruesome violence must also find violence acceptable in real life. Applying this logic, fans of movies like Saw must be dangerous. Oleksinski's moral outrage isn't new. Critics throughout cinematic history have written about the supposedly depraved nature of horror fans, but no decade saw more panic around horror movies than the 1980s. The decade began with a machete-wielding masked killer stalking teens at Camp Crystal Lake. Friday the 13th was a success at the box office, drawing in nearly $60 million worldwide. Despite its success, the film was not as widely embraced by critics as its thrilling older brother, Halloween, 1978. Friday the 13th was much bloodier, and critics took note. Renowned film critic Gene Siskel was one of the most outspoken critics of slashers generally, and Friday the 13th specifically. In his review of Friday the 13th, Siskel levied the heaviest punishment possible by a critic. He intentionally spoiled the ending to dissuade people from watching it. And if that weren't enough, he concluded his review by publishing the name and address of Paramount chairman Charles Bluhdorn, encouraging readers to send him hate mail. He tried to do the same for starring actress Betsy Palmer, but he was unable to find her private address. So he encouraged readers to mail their complaints to her small hometown of Rowayton, Connecticut. In addition to his column in the Chicago Tribune, Siskel co-hosted a television show called Sneak Previews with the legendary film critic Roger Ebert. Neither critic was a fan of slasher movies, and the duo decided to dedicate an entire episode of their show to rebuking Friday the 13th and the spate of slashers that had cropped up after the success of Halloween. Siskel's palpable ire for the film bled into outrage at its fans, much like in Oleksinski's review of Spiral. Siskel speculated that fans of Friday the 13th were some very sick people who hate women. Rather than confirming that they're sick people who hate women, my research shows that fans of slashers and other horror movies are simply morbidly curious. Morbid curiosity is a straightforward concept. When the costs of learning about a threat are low, it's advantageous to pay attention and gather information. In these times, we feel curious, morbidly curious. It's a remarkably simple idea, but it is influenced by a complex array of experiences and traits, and it manifests in myriad ways. It's worth clarifying here what I mean by morbidly curious. It's a phrase that can be easily misunderstood. I don't mean that the curiosity itself is morbid. When I say morbid curiosity, I am not referring to a pathological, abnormal, or unhealthy curiosity. The descriptor morbid here is simply referring to death or the things that lead to it. Morbid curiosity is a curiosity about things that are threatening or potentially dangerous. In my research, I've discovered that morbid curiosity tends to fall into 4 categories. 1. Minds of dangerous people. 2. Physical violence. 3. Bodily injuries. And 4. Paranormal dangers. I've also developed the morbid curiosity scale, which scientists use to assess how morbidly curious a person is and where they fall with respect to these 4 categories. As we'll see throughout this book, your level of morbid curiosity is a powerful predictor of certain behaviors and can even positively influence your psychological well-being. Given that there are 4 broad categories of morbid curiosity, there are many different ways one might engage in morbidly curious behavior. For example, watching horror movies is a common everyday example of morbid curiosity in modern times. Themes in horror movies span the spectrum of morbid curiosity, from paranormal threats to serial killers and outlandish bodily injuries. However, not every morbidly curious person is a horror fan, though every horror fan is likely more morbidly curious than the average person. Because horror fandom maps quite well onto all 4 categories of morbid curiosity, there will be several times throughout the book where I'll talk about the psychology of horror fans as a core group representing people who are morbidly curious. This will be a familiar shorthand to many of you. Horror movies, books, and spooky cultural artifacts are all around us. Not everyone has a strong impulse toward morbid curiosity. Why, then, are some of us so powerfully drawn to content that portrays evil, violence, and suffering? Is an interest in the darker side of life a sign of moral bankruptcy? In my experience, this isn't an accurate assessment. I've met with and studied morbidly curious people all over the world, from haunted attractions to horror conventions to university classrooms. Anecdotally and empirically, morbidly curious people are just as moral, empathetic, and kind as anyone else. If you attend a horror convention or an oddities expo, you won't run into deranged psychopaths waiting to catch you alone in a dark hallway. Instead, you'll find a genuine community of people with skin thickened from years of side eyes and hushed comments. You'll find people with dark minds, but soft hearts. This book is filled with the latest research on the science of morbid curiosity. As a pioneer of psychological research on this topic, much of the research I talk about will be studies that I led or was involved in. Since several of these studies were published in just the past few years, I expect a lot of this information to be new to many of you. After an overview of what morbid curiosity is in Chapter 1, I'll explore its origins and life on Earth throughout Chapter 2. You'll come to find that the roots of morbid curiosity are much older than we may think, and that some form of it is found in many animals. If zebras could watch movies about lions stalking their prey, they probably would. In the next few chapters, I'll dive into the details of my new theory of why we seek out the macabre through true crime, ghost stories, violent entertainment, gruesome art, and other cultural artifacts. In Chapter 7, we'll take a detour through the dream world and examine a question that people have been asking for millennia. What are dreams for? Chapter 8 will have you questioning what you thought you knew about empathy. As it turns out, enjoying a film where teens get slashed by a masked killer may not be a sign of low empathy. Chapters 9 and 10 will explain why we seek out scary media when the world is scary, and how this might help us become more resilient. Rather than escape from a scary world into happy, safe fictions, we often escape into fictional worlds even more terrifying than our own. You'll also learn about the psychological benefits of morbid curiosity through stories of scientific expeditions at haunted attractions. In news that may not come as a surprise to parents, Chapter 11 will explore why kids are so drawn to evil villains and scary play, and why exploring these concepts through play can be good for their children's psychological development. Despite how vital it is to human nature, morbid curiosity has historically been maligned and unfairly vilified. Those with an overt interest in the macabre are sometimes seen as problematic and cast as outsiders. My central argument in this book is that this negative view of morbid curiosity is mistaken. Far from being a stain on our psyche, my research shows that morbid curiosity is a common and healthy aspect of our psychology. It's a relic of our evolutionary history that can continue to serve us in the modern world. For the morbidly curious, I hope you'll find some insight about yourself as you listen. Why you love true crime despite feeling disgust toward the killer, why Halloween gives you a cozy feeling, and why you sometimes just can't look away. For those without a penchant for the macabre, you'll come to understand your friend who can't stop talking about the latest horror movie or whose dream car is an old hearse. The academics who listen to this book will find a fresh and more complete explanation of a topic that feels familiar but is yet to be thoroughly explored. Behavioral ecologists will be familiar with the work on predator inspection that I discuss, but see it applied to humans in a new and fascinating way. Anthropologists may recognize stories from the Ecuadorian shuar, the West African Bang.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?